Speaker recognizes Representative Wendzel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Permission to speak to the whole package.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, I rise today for only the second time in my long 5 years in this institution to speak in opposition to this legislation. These bills before us today are the most significant pieces of legislation for all of our constituents that are being considered by this chamber. In short, these complex and convoluted bills do nothing to address the issues our states face: an unreliable power grid and unaffordable rates. Madam Speaker, my colleague from the 7th District spent the summer, along with myself and others, listening to people around our state and the hardships that they have faced regarding energy. This package does just the opposite of what we heard during those meetings. In that tour, the demand of the people in our state were made crystal clear. I want to be warm in the winter, and I expect my lights to come on when I flip a switch without breaking the bank. Simple. These bills do not address their needs. In fact, these bills are a clear indication of how tone-deaf politicians can be when their constituents are spelling it out loud and clear. Instead of fixing our aging grid, these bills will raise the rates of our Michigan families, all the while destabilizing our already unreliable grid. Madam Speaker, based on my conversation with my electric provider, we are looking at possibly a 40 to 50% increase of family energy costs just to start. To some, that might not seem like much, but to the elderly on a budget, to the single mother, to those living paycheck to paycheck, that spike will bring about difficult decisions. It will create a choice: to put food on the table, to buy kids new clothes, or to pay their utility bills. You see, this package of bills doesn't address these very real challenges. Instead, this irresponsible and thoughtless policy does the opposite. It pushes an arbitrary goal at a pace decided entirely by those that have no background, expertise, or knowledge in this complex field. Why are we so obsessed with 30-second talking points that we're ignoring the voice of the job creators who have sounded the alarm against these bills? Do we just think they're bluffing? Are we in this chamber beholden to the talking points alone? Are we vassals of other elected officials, or are we content living in ignorance? Madam Speaker, I can't be sure. What I do know is this: these bills and this policy are just plain bad. Bad for manufacturers who will no longer come to our state. They will be forced to flee in droves once we make their main fuel source and rates unaffordable. They're bad for our constituents that will see nothing but rising costs on their monthly bills and an increase in power outages. And finally, these are bad for anybody who wants to make or keep their home here in beautiful Michigan. As legislators, at a minimum, we have a responsibility to know what we are voting on, especially on legislation that will drastically change the lives of our constituents. When I talked to my colleagues about this legislation, and I met with talking points on how this is only adding a little more wind and solar, or that it really just doesn't change things too much, or that it's just codifying a certain plan, that's really deeply concerning to me. How dare any one of us vote on legislation of this magnitude without understanding the real implications and consequences? Madam Speaker, only fools do not learn from the mistakes of others. In our country, we have had 2 examples of states which have done an incredibly poor job with their energy policies, ignoring basic energy fundamentals: California and Texas, one run by Democrats, the other by Republicans. Energy isn't partisan until today. It never has been in our state. It doesn't matter which party passes the legislation. What matters is following sound principles that result in reliable and affordable power for our residents. This legislation follows down the dangerous path of other failing states by imposing mandates based on talking points, not when decisions are economically feasible. In a speech made before the British Parliament, Churchill said, "Safety and certainty in oil lie in variety and variety alone." Times are quite different now, but today that quote can be expanded to the diversification among all energy sources, conventional and new. Unfortunately, these bills before us ignore that foresight and put all our eggs in one basket, ignoring a diverse, all-of-the-above approach. This legislation ignores there are no risk-free options and that risk come in many forms. One of the biggest risks this legislation poses to the people of Michigan is reducing reliability by taking the first step towards eliminating or making natural gas economically uncompetitive, one of the cleanest, most reliable, affordable, and domestic sources of energy, and that has turned our nation into an energy superpower. Madam Speaker, I could speak for some time, as you can tell, on all the flaws of this legislation, but I will conclude with these points. Proponents of this legislation say this will lower rates for our residents. It clearly won't, and will do just the opposite. Just read the bill and speak with an electricity provider. Proponents of this legislation say this will help increase our grid reliability. Again, it won't. This sacrifices reliable baseload generation and forces our state to rely on intermediate sources, leading to more brownouts, just like in Texas and California. Proponents of this legislation will say that costs will be absorbed by big utilities or government subsidies. Not true. We, here, will bear all those costs. It's even written into the bills. Finally, this will drive businesses out of our state, taking their investments and their talent with them. If any one of us is serious about growing our population, they'll vote no on this legislation. Madam Speaker, these bills are not just bad. They're a recipe for disaster. They won't lower rates, they won't enhance grid reliability, and they will darken Michigan's economy. This legislation doesn't represent progress, it represents a perilous leap into the unknown. It's time we embrace wisdom over recklessness, real expertise over talking points, and the well-being of our constituents over any political agenda. It's a tale as old as time, politicians thinking that they know best. I came into this job as a bright-eyed optimist. I truly did. I believe that everyone here was elected because they wanted to make this state better, even though they held different ideas and beliefs than me. I don't always agree with legislation put forth by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, and that's okay. I believe most of the bills we pass have true intentions for the betterment of our state, even if I strongly disagree with them. Not today. Today is the day that I am truly disappointed. Today is the day that I have seen firsthand how knowing and willing ignorance have come before this institution. This legislation is something that will impact every child, parent, and person. Not just now, but for years and years to come. Energy encompasses everything in our lives. It fuels everything, from the lights in this chamber to the small businesses that make up the backbone of our economy, to corporations that supply millions of jobs. This is not a light issue, it is the issue. The day will come soon when rates will skyrocket. Our office phones will ring. Constituents will yell or plead or even cry, because I know this happened to me 2 months into the job. I didn't know what to do or who to blame then, but I will know next time. I will know exactly whose number I will give them. Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote no on this legislation. Let's keep our lights on, our rates down, and our people here. Thank you.